G'day and welcome to Beyond at Home today. We really are thankful that you are here and hope that you have a really great Sunday from wherever you're tuning in.
We are so excited for part 3 of Figuring Faith Out this week, where we're going to be looking at an idea that gets a bit of a bad rap but actually can be really helpful when we apply it to our lives. So we're going to flick over to Chris, our communicator, and he's going to explain a bit more about that. But before that, we're going to have some songs from the band, and then you'll see our faces again at the end.
This is Do It Again by Elevation Worship. Walking around these walls, I thought by now they'd fall, but you have never failed me yet. Waiting for change to come, knowing the battle's won, for you have never failed me yet. Your promise still stands, great is your faithfulness, faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You never failed me yet. I've seen you move the mountains, and I believe I'll see you do it again. You made a way when there was no way, and I believe I'll see you do it again.
Peace, bring it all to peace. The storm surrounding me, let it break. At your name still, call the sea to still, the rage in me to still every wave. At your name, Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, your silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, breathe. Call these bones to live. Call these lungs to sing again. I will praise Jesus, Jesus. You make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus. The silence fear. Jesus, Jesus. You make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus. Your name is a light that the shadows can't deny. Your name cannot be overcome. Your name is a light forever lifted high. Your name cannot be overcome. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, the silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus. Your name is the light that the shadows can't deny. Your name cannot be overcome. Your name is a light forever lifted high. Your name cannot be overcome. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus.
Welcome to Beyond at Home. In this episode, we're going to be talking about one bad word that can bring about good results, and then I'm going to give you 2 things that you can pre-decide on to help you figure faith out. So let's get into it. If you're new to the whole faith thing, hang on. You've picked an awesome time to join us. For the past couple of weeks, we've been talking about this idea in this series called Figuring Faith out. And if you're just tuning in for the first time today, you can see part 1 and 2 of that series on our Facebook page or on our YouTube channel. But right now, I said that there was one bad word that gives a whole lot of good results. And that word that we're going to be talking about is discipline. So here's my personal definition of discipline. Doing things you're supposed to do, even when you don't want to do them. Now in isolation, there's been a whole bunch of things that people have been saying, hey, these are things you should be doing. I'm not sure how isolation has been for you, but it seems like there's a whole list of things that we're supposed to be doing. Whether that's learn a new skill, do a puzzle, read a book. Connect with those people that you haven't spoken to in years. Finish all the jobs around the house. Eat healthier. Get up earlier. Call your parents more. The list goes on. And as I've been thinking a little bit more about discipline, I think there's probably 2 broad groups that all of us fit into in different areas in our lives when it comes to discipline. On the one hand, there's that group of us who we kind of hear a piece of advice, whether it's at Beyond at Home or through a friend or on a podcast or in a book, and the advice is about relationships or finances or something. And we think to ourselves, yeah, that's a really good piece of advice. And then we do nothing about it. And then there's that other group of people who are just super, super disciplined all the time. And on the one hand, it's kind of inspiring. But on the other hand, it's just downright annoying. You know that person that runs past your window every single morning? Or that person who's been up since 2:30 a.m. and just doesn't need coffee to get their day started. And by 6 a.m., they've already done a yoga class, read a book and journal for 3 hours, and you're still trying to figure out what day of the week it is. And like I said, all of us kind of fit into one of those 2 broad groups in different areas within our lives. Now, here's the interesting thing about discipline. Whether you love it or whether you hate it, there are some things that you do in your life right now that started as a discipline, but now you actually enjoy them. For me personally, that thing is running. Okay, whenever I played sport, I used to hate running. In fact, I would look for ways to train that didn't involve running at all. Then I kind of stopped playing sport and I gained what in my brother's eyes was an unacceptable amount of weight, and he bullied me into running. And when I first started doing it, I hated it so much. I didn't want to run. It wasn't fun. It hurt. But now, fast forward a couple of years, and I actually look for opportunities in my week to run. I look for times in my day where I can squeeze it in. And in fact, I feel like something's missing or something's not quite right if I don't get to run on a regular basis. Now, for you, that might look like something different. Maybe you couldn't think of anything worse than running in your life. But maybe for you, it was music. You know, your parents, your music teacher always told you to practice, and you didn't really like practicing at the start, but now you look for opportunities to play the guitar or the piano or sing. Maybe for you it was about eating healthy. Like right at the very start, you couldn't think of anything worse than eating healthy, but now you love it and you look for opportunities to cook healthy foods. Whatever it is, these things that start in our lives as disciplines often turn out to be some of the things we enjoy the most. And here's the other interesting thing about discipline, is that discipline always results in progress. Now think about that for a moment. There are very few things in life that are like this. There are very few things where you can rock up with a bad attitude and not wanting to do it and do it anyway, and it still results in progress. Discipline is one of those things that regardless of how you feel, regardless of what you think about it, if you do it, even if it's out of habit, it will result in progress. Now, where disciplines intersect with this thing that we call faith is what we've been talking about for the last few weeks, are these 5 faith catalysts. And what we're talking about today is this thing called private disciplines. See, when you begin to hear someone's faith journey, if you listen hard enough, or if you ask enough questions, there will always be a point where they begin to say, well, then I started to pray, despite the fact it was a bit weird. Then I began to read my Bible, even though it was kind of daunting and there were parts that I didn't fully understand. Then I began to give financially, even though I didn't really want to. Now you might be thinking to yourself, yeah, well, Chris, that's great for those people, but I'm just not really a disciplined person. You know, discipline isn't kind of really my jam. I kind of like to wing it. I kind of like to play it by ear. But here's the thing that you need to know about faith. That faith is like a muscle. And when you work a muscle out and you get it tired, the best way to build it stronger is to work it out and then give it a period of time to rest and recover. And there are times where God will push your faith and test your faith almost to the point that you think it's going to break in order to grow it. And private disciplines, unlike some of the other catalysts that we're looking at throughout this series, is something that you have complete control over. It's something that you can work out day in and day out, and you can actually begin to grow your faith.
Yes, awesome. And
in Matthew's biography on the life of Jesus, there's a section where he talks about 3 private disciplines that Jesus discusses. Now, we're only going to talk about 2 today. If you're an overachiever, you can go and read the 3rd for yourself, but 2's more than enough for us. Now, before we get to that though, I need to speak to those of you who are watching who are followers of Jesus. Because what Jesus says next, you probably maybe skimmed over if you read it, depending on the church background you grew up in. Maybe you never ever heard these words of Jesus highlighted in such a way. And there will be a tendency as you listen to the words of Jesus to maybe get uncomfortable. Maybe you're even going to get a little bit angry with me. But if you do, here's what I want you to know. Jesus said it, not me. Take any issues you have up with him. So let's get to it. So with that set up, let's get to what Jesus says. He says, watch out. So he begins the discussion with a warning. He says, watch out, don't do your good deeds. Now in this context, good deeds are these private disciplines. And he goes on to explain why not to do your good deeds, to be admired by others. And he tells us why. He says, for you will lose the reward from your Father in heaven. And at this point, Jesus has set up everything that's about to come next. He's speaking to individuals and he's saying, hey, what's about to follow? Yes, some of these things you will do in public some of the time. But what I'm speaking about specifically is when you do these things in private. In other words, your private disciplines. And at this part, it might seem a little bit odd, particularly if you're a follower of Jesus and you respond by saying, well, Chris, I don't do the things I do in private, these private disciplines to get a reward. And I would say, well, that's okay. I didn't bring it up. Jesus said the reward part. And then he gives us the first discipline on the list. He says, when you give to someone in need. And he's talking specifically here about what's called alms giving. Because in that day and age, 2,000 years ago, temple life or going to church or the synagogue was a really big part of culture. And so what would happen, because it was such a big part of culture that people who perhaps had a skin disease or were disabled or who were destitute, they would line up as people were walking into the temple. And as people were walking into the temple, they would often see these people lining up and they would throw them a little bit of money. Now, this wasn't, what was called the tithe. And if maybe you went to a religious school or maybe you've heard about this tithe thing, a tithe was essentially 10 to 20% of a Jewish follower's wage that they would give to the mission of the synagogue and the mission of the local church to help move that forward. So this wasn't that tithe. This was just, hey, I see a need, I'm going to fill a need. And Jesus says, hey, as you're going to the temple and you see a need and you might throw that out, when you give to someone in need, he says this, don't do as the hypocrites do, blowing trumpets in the synagogues and streets to call attention to their acts of charity. He says, I tell you the truth, they have received all the reward they will ever get. In other words, all their reward is, oh wow, look at that generous person over there. Jesus said, that's it, that's the reward. But when you give to someone in need, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. And that kind of sounds like, Jesus, what are you talking about? He says this, he says, give your gifts in private and your Father who sees everything will reward you. Now in this context, Jesus doesn't say what the reward is, but we can guess from context that the reward is probably honor. That when God sees your generosity, that he will reward you with honor. Now, let me ask you a question. What if you really believe those words of Jesus? What if you really believe that Jesus saw your financial generosity, that he saw where you gave to, and that he actually honored that? What if you believe that Jesus saw how much you gave and honored that he saw where you gave to and that he honored that? Now, I don't know you personally, but I would guess that perhaps one of the reasons you're not more generous is because you don't fully believe the words of Jesus here, which is not a generosity issue. It's actually a faith issue. Now, I can imagine some of you are watching this, and yes, I'm talking specifically to you, and you might be offended by this idea. So let me help you understand exactly what I mean here, because what I'm not saying here is like, oh, the church just wants your money all the time, because I know that some of you might resist this. So let's all get on the same page, right? Regardless of whether you're Christian, Whether you're a Muslim, whether you're a Jew or a Hindu or a Buddhist, or you have a new age faith, whatever that is. See, there's a point in our lives where we all have perfect faith. Regardless of your belief in God, whether it's a man or a woman or a multitude of deities, every single one of us who has faith or are trying to figure faith out, each of us has a point where we have 100% faith in God. And that point is when we breathe our last breath. All of us believe, hey, when we breathe our last breath, there's something on the other side, whether that's heaven, whether that's hell, whether that's purgatory, whether that's becoming one with the universe, whatever it is. Here's what Jesus teaches all throughout the New Testament, that from now until the moment you take your last breath, the thing you're going to trust in the most is your money. What you want to trust in the most is your ability to control your environment and your circumstances through your wealth. Now, if the God who controls your eternity, who we believe is a personal God, who we believe has invited us to refer to him as Father, and Jesus references this in the verses and the passages that we've been looking at today. And if Jesus wants the best for you and wants you to trust him now, doesn't it make sense that he would mess with the very thing that's going to get in the way of you trusting him in between now and the moment you take your last breath? Your money. That's why money is a faith thing, not because God wants your money or God needs your money, but because God wants to teach you to trust him. And that means removing the things that you currently trust in. That's why at Beyond we teach the idea of give, save, live. Pick a percentage for each. Give some of those resources to God, save the second percentage, and then live on the rest. And I know you're probably feeling a tension right now. I know you're probably, particularly if you're a Jesus follower who doesn't give. So before you switch me off, before you kind of relieve that tension, I'd encourage you to actually pay attention to that tension, because that tension is an issue of faith. And the question you've got to answer is, do you believe God can and God will take care of you if you put him first in the area of your finances? That's the issue, and that's a faith issue. Even when you give unhappily, you begin to transfer your trust from you to God. Now, Jesus moves on. And aren't you kind of glad he does at this point? He says, when you pray. Now, this is kind of where Jesus shifts it from talking about the things, our wealth, to our time. Because when you pray is a time thing, and who has time to fit in everything they need to, let alone prayer? He says, when you pray, don't be like the hypocrites who love to pray publicly on street corners and in the synagogues where everyone can see them. I tell you the truth, that is all the reward they will ever get. Similar to the whole almsgiving thing. He says, but when you pray, go away by yourself, shut the door behind you, and pray to your Father in private. Then your Father who sees everything will reward you. Now, Jesus isn't talking about on-the-go kind of prayer. See, that prayer you pray when you're in your car or when you see that text message or that phone call light up from that person, it's going to be a challenging conversation. You just pray, God, help me to get through this conversation. No, Jesus is talking about your most valuable asset, your time. When you carve out a section of time and it's just you and God alone together. In fact, I think that if you were to talk to followers of Jesus and you were to ask them, hey, what's the reward you get from prioritizing time in your life to pray to God or connect with God? I guarantee you they wouldn't say, because God answers all my prayers. I guarantee they wouldn't say, because life is always easy. But I think what they might say is something like, when I come away from that time, no matter what I'm facing in my life, no matter how overwhelming, no matter how difficult or challenging it might be, I come away with a sense of ease, and I can't put my finger on it and I can't explain it, but God does something in that time where I come away and I believe that I can face the challenges that are in front of me. And here's what I want for you as we wrap up our time together. I want you to pre-decide 2 decisions this month. And here's why. Because when you begin to pre-decide these 2 things, you begin to work your faith muscles. And your faith muscles begin to grow, and it helps you figure faith out. So here's the 2 things I want you to pre-decide on. And we kind of really package them in a really practical way here. They're called our 4 Monday. I want you to give your first few minutes and your first few dollars to God for this month. And if you hear that and you're like, wow, a month is just so long, then don't pick a month. Pick 2 weeks or pick 10 days. Just do it. Just pick your first few minutes and you give your first few minutes and your first few dollars to God. And because I've seen how these private disciplines have impacted my life and they've helped me figure faith out. And I just believe they're so valuable. I want to help you as best I can figure faith out and give those first few minutes to God. So either in the comments on Facebook, or if you're watching on YouTube, in the description below, you're going to find a link. And that link is to a Bible reading plan that's going to start tomorrow. And if you're watching this later, you won't be able to do it with everyone, but you can still follow that link and you can join up with us later. But if you join, this plan is going to start tomorrow. And for the next 7 days, I'm going to walk with you as you begin to give your first few minutes of your day to God. I'll join you in the comments. I'll read along with you. I'm going to help you as best as I can begin to develop that practice. Then in addition to that, what I want you to do is I want you to give your first few dollars to God. I want you to transform into a percentage giver. And here's how you do that. You pick a percentage. It could be 3%, it could be 2%, it could be 5%, it could be 10%. It doesn't matter how much, you just need to pick a percentage. Then whatever comes into your hand for this month, or for the next 2 weeks, or for the next 10 days, give that percentage away. And here's why we talk about being a percentage giver here at Beyond, is because you don't want, and God doesn't want you to be a needs-based giver. You know, there's people who say, well, I'm not going to give until I see a need. Well, there wouldn't be a need in the first place if you were generous and if people gave anyway. Here's why I don't want you to be just a needs-based giver, particularly if you're a follower of Jesus. Because God wants to remind you with your finances that your hope is not in your wealth, it's in Him. So when you pre-decide to pick a percentage to give away, you're saying, God, I trust you. I trust that my faith and my confidence is not in my wealth, but it's in you. And here's the thing, if you don't trust me, if you don't trust Beyond, then don't give to Beyond, but give away to an organization or a charity that you believe in. But if you do believe in Beyond, then you can find the link to that in our Facebook comments or in our YouTube description as well. And as you begin to pay attention to this tension over wealth and over time, as you decide to give your first few minutes and your first few dollars to God, something will happen within you. And if you talk to followers of Jesus who have practiced these disciplines, they'll tell you the same thing. They'll say at the beginning, it was hard. At the beginning, I didn't even really want to. At the beginning, I had to force myself to do it. But over time, I actually began to love. I actually began to enjoy spending time with God. I actually began to enjoy being generous. And what started as a discipline is something that they began to look forward to in a way that they never thought was possible. So my hope for you is you'll discover this joy. And that begins by giving your first few minutes and your first few dollars to God. So I'd love to invite you to join us in this challenge for the next couple of weeks. And I'd love to invite you to continue this conversation in our Beyond the Message podcast that comes out on Wednesday, wherever you find your podcasts. We'll see you next week.
Well, hey, thank you so much for tuning in to another Beyond at Home. We hope you got a lot of value out of the message, out of Chris, and enjoyed having the Beyond worship experience in your own home or from wherever you are.
If you are interested in having a look at our social media, we would love that. Love to connect with you. So jump over to Facebook, Instagram, or our YouTube channel, wherever you might be watching. Subscribe so you can see more of what we've got coming up.
We've also launched a new podcast called Beyond the Message, and we take the ideas from Chris's message that he just delivered, and we release it on Wednesday, and we just talk a bit more about it so that the 167 hours outside of this Sunday experience are really benefited in your life. Apart from that, that's all from us. We'll see you this time next week. See you later.